Yeah, I think we're good now, and I can see that people can see my screen. So I'm gonna get started. Welcome to the Infrastructure FGU. Thank you for coming. This is my second one, and I feel a little bit more confident than on the first one. So I hope this one goes well. I'm gonna talk about focus and strategy for the infrastructure team. We continue to grow the infrastructure team as well. We'll touch briefly on the GCP migration, and then I'll talk about the focus going forward now that we've gotten that rock from over our necks. I will also touch on error budgets because it's something that it's an OKR for us and for the entire company in Q3. And I do want to touch on it to explain why we're implementing this, and then I'll review the Q3 OKRs for infrastructure. Focus on strategy. This is actually, I'm reusing this slide from the first FGU that I did because our focus continues to be on availability for GitLab.com. Now that we're on GCP, we get to move into the next phase, and we want to make GitLab.com ready for mission critical customer workloads with an uptime of 99.9%. Again, the theme of everything we do is predictability. I outlined the last time this strategy, this 4-phase strategy to essentially get a handle on GitLab.com, and we've stabilized the patient. We haven't had any self-inflicted outages for the last 60 days, so great work for the team, and I'm super happy that we're stable now. We've moved on to the next phase, which is catch and release. So this is all about inventorying what we're managing, and we're specifically interested on services because this is tied to a lot of the work that we need to get done, and specifically to error budgets. Growing the infrastructure team, we have continued to hire, to get great new hires. John Scarbeck and Craig Barrett started in July. They started in July. They focus on the SRE function. We do have 2 new hires on that function as well. Amar, which starts in later this month, and then another SRE in Germany, which will start in November. We also want to welcome Nikolai to the database. He has already contributed a significant amount of skill and knowledge to the database, especially with the migration. Super excited to have him on board. And we've also hired a manager for the site availability team in infrastructure, who starts actually on August 31st, but for all intents and purposes, that is September. GCP migration, I can't even begin to describe the sense of relief. There is still a little bit of, I have this feeling of coming out from the fog of war and trying to figure out, okay, we're done with this, what's next? So I need to focus on that. But thank you for all the work and all the focus. Congratulations on a job well done. I got these screenshots from Slack because I think they reflect a company-wide feeling that this was an amazing feat, and it's done. There's still a lot of work that we need to do that is related to the migration, post-migration work to finish shutting down Azure and getting everything we need from there and straightening up some things that we need to get done in GCP, but this was fantastic. So again, thank you. However, we're done with GCP, so where are we gonna focus next? And essentially, one of the discussions that's been going on most recently is GitLab.com stability, availability. We need to really focus on the fact that GitLab.com is a production site. And one of the things that we need to do is stop deploying release candidates to GitLab.com. We're the only customer who gets these. And this has been done because we need to test these things so that when our releases get to on-prem customers, they're rock solid. But GitLab.com is taking an increased importance, so we also need to treat it like one of those customers. Now, what's missing there is the ability for engineering to test their changes at scale, and we're going to do the work to do that. So we want to encourage change against GitLab.com. We do need to move from having these large deployments to having a higher rate of smaller changes. And we want to do this because that allows for containment, meaning, since there's more changes, when they finally reach production, we know what's changed recently, and it's a fairly contained change. So we can actually focus on the behavior of that change. We also want to have focused automation on the changes that are being introduced. They may require automation. So rather than having lots and lots of changes that require lots of different, that can potentially require lots of different tweaks to the automation, if we make lots of these small changes and we're very focused on them, then the stability of the site will follow. In order to do that, we have been talking about creating a pipeline for commits to master. And in this pipeline, essentially, there's going to be functional testing, integration testing, security testing, database-specific testing, and then automation testing. So we have discussed the creation of new production-like testing environments so that we don't have to test against production. We want to have these environments that are relatively close to production in terms of the data that is available and the size and scale, but away from production. So more on this during the summit. There's going to be a couple of working groups trying to figure out how we're going to accomplish this. And this is iteration one. There's actually going to follow, we've talked about Kubernetes and other technologies that can help us do this. But as a first step, we really want to essentially try to stand up these environments so that we control the amount of change that goes into the environment. Observability is also another area that we want to focus on. We do have our budgets as an OKR, and in order to do that, we need to break down the services that make up the GitLab application so that we can do attribution and error budgeting. Andrew has been working on generalized metrics that should get us on a level set for different services and should actually give us a better visibility into what's going on. And in terms of not having, getting everything on a level set so that we're not talking about transactions for one service and something else for another service. He'll have more details on that, but the early work that he showed me looks fantastic. And then there are a couple of areas that we need to focus on. Certainly the database has been an issue in the past. It's been very stable for the last 60 days, and I'm super excited about the work that's gone on to make that happen. We do know that our current replication strategy has some issues, so there are some discussions as to what are we going to do moving forward to do this. Nikolai and Andreas have already taken the lead, and we're relying on Andres to also help us to decide and implement what we're going to do going forward. And then engineering is our biggest customer for the database, and we want to help them use the database successfully at the scale that the GitLab.com database exists. And there are essentially it's a three-pronged approach. Automation is one of it. Think of linters and what can we do to look at the SQL that's being introduced into the environment to make it safe. That's only going to catch a certain percentage of obvious cases. We also need to do a fair amount of education. So we have great Ruby developers and great Go developers, but we also need good SQL developers within engineering who actually understand what the effects of the SQL that is being produced will have on a database of the size of the one in production. And then I spoke about the testing pipeline. We, again, need to provide the runway and the tools and the environments for engineering to be able to test at the scale that we have in production without affecting production itself. So Mac, Marian, and I are already working on figuring out what this looks like. Again, we're meeting during the summit with essentially a working group to try and outline what this is going to be and what iterations we're going to go through. The second aspect that I want to focus on is the storage nodes. Our problems on Monday, we knew we would have problems post-migration on Monday. And they essentially center around the storage nodes. And partly we focus so much on the database and on the migration plan that we sort of said, well, this is probably going to be okay. We were able to resolve those issues, but at the core of the company, we're a storage company, and we certainly, all the Git repos are in these storage nodes. So that is actually the ultimate data. So we need to pay more attention to them. And we probably are going to have to dive into more fine-grained repo management to be able to essentially keep track of problematic repos and being able to move them around. Some of that functionality already exists. We just need to take it to the next level so that it's much more usable and we can react faster to issues that trouble repos may bring, or for instance, repos that we consider to be the IP for some reason or another. So a lot of conversations need to happen with engineering to make this happen as well. I'm gonna, again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm gonna touch on error budgets because I think it's very important. I've heard that they're kind of being perceived as sort of punitive metrics, and they're not. Mostly, they help us quantify risk as it pertains to the environment, and they provide clear objective metrics that determine how much risk we're willing to take on the service. So 100% availability is not a feasible goal. And so what the next best thing to it is to essentially assume that we will have issues and that we will have downtime, and try to essentially constrain that to known parameters. From an infrastructure point of view, it helps us prioritize which teams need our help the most. So if we have teams that are running into walls or incidents or outages, then that helps us prioritize help for that team. Here are a couple of links for the handbook. Eric wrote about error budgets. We will be expanding on that to essentially flesh out the implementation of how we keep track of them and how that affects priorities. And then there are the OKRs for this quarter. A quick update on the OKRs. Our primary one was moving to GCP in July 28th. We slipped by 3 weeks. I think it was worth taking that slippage and refining some of the final aspects that were giving us some headaches during the migration. There is still a significant amount of mop-up work, as I mentioned earlier. In terms of preserving our error budgets, from an infrastructure point of view, we're actually doing well. No self-inflicted outages at this point. We have had some incidents. We had a recent one with backups on the database. We were still on safe harbor. We could restore the database, but we've identified some things that we need to do to strengthen that, and more importantly, to know immediately when things are not working. And then in terms of hiring, some of these numbers are a little off in the calculations, and that's my fault because it's just been kind of a fog. But we did hire an SRE manager, and then we're a little bit behind on the database and the systems hiring. So we do need to start turning on the fire on that front. And with that, I'll be happy to take questions. I got ready this time. I have my iPad just with comments so that I don't mess up the main screen. Mark is asking, are you using ultimate security features for this testing? I think you're referring to the environments, to the pipeline, the testing pipeline. Right now, that's just a sort of a conceptual idea. We will work with security to figure out what is it that they want to do to be able to do the testing. So just like I mentioned, there was functional testing, integration testing, database testing. These functional teams will decide how they're doing that. What we want to make sure is that we, provide the environment so that engineering can test, and then interested stakeholders can actually add their gates to the pipeline to make sure that we catch anything from database issues to security issues, etc. So I don't have a good answer for what we'll end up using. I think we'll have some data post-summit meetings on this. Any more questions? Eric says that we've started capturing internal customers on our product categories page. Yeah, I'll expand on this a little bit. So some of the features are, security. Catherine's team is, there are features that are being developed in engineering for some of these functional areas like operations. So Dahlia's team is working on that. And there's a security, sorry, I forgot the nomenclature, but essentially we in infrastructure and security become customers of these teams as well. Yes. So security and infra all need to work with product to figure out important decisions like this. And that's actually one of the reasons why when we started thinking about these testing environments, we were trying to figure out how do we structure, we know this will end up being a project, and how do we structure and manage this project? And rather than having a single individual that is sort of running the project in a GCP-like structure, we're gonna try this triumvirate of managers. Each manager owns people that have responsibilities for this project, and it will be these managers that will do this. And what Eric is describing is essentially this. Eric has also pointed out that we added a bullet, dogfooding, to our collaboration core value. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because dogfooding is something that I've heard since I've joined, but now it's actually in the handbook, clearly spelled out. So yes, consuming our own product is important. And I think a big part of that is because if it's working for us, then there's a high degree of confidence that it will work well for our customers. Brandon is asking, what is the long-term direction for moving to Kubernetes? What implications does it have for your team? So we know what the technological advantages are for adopting Kubernetes, and obviously GitLab, the product, has support for that. We don't have a explicit structure or strategy right now, and most of that can be attributed to GCP. We decided that we were going to do a one-to-one move. There was talk early on of, hey, since we're moving, let's start implementing Kubernetes, but that really represented too much change and introduced too much risk to this migration. So we are going to explore this. Andrew has a lot of ideas on how we can use these. It is possible that the first stop for starting to leverage Kubernetes is on these testing environments, which would allow us to actually start playing with them and to start moving them into the actual production environment. I think we need to flesh out some details in terms of objectives and iterations to essentially adopt the technology. Obviously, Helm charts and cloud native is an initiative that has already been moving in that direction. It lost some traction, I think, mostly due to just how GCP just consumed everything in its path. So again, now that we're past GCP, we're thinking about the future and we're starting to clamp down on these things. Some of these conversations, again, will happen on the summit, because it's going to be great to have all of these players under the same roof at the same time, face to face, and just being able to whiteboard a number of things. So I think a lot of these strategy questions, we will have better answers post-summit in the first couple of weeks of September, when we can actually digest all that data and start outlining specific plans moving forward. I don't see any more questions, but I'm happy to take them. We still have 10 minutes to go. Do we do go in one, twice, etc. in FGUs? Oh, thank you. My pleasure. Great. Then I think we can. Oh, hang on. William, how can you figure out how to whiteboard remotely so that productivity can continue post-summit? Actually, that's a great question, and it's something that I explored in a previous life. I think there are actually two. This is a two-part answer. Obviously, when you're face-to-face, and especially in the environment of the summit, there's going to be a lot of activity in terms of whiteboarding. But I think once we're, so whiteboarding really only works if you're synchronous, right? So if you look at the infrastructure team, for instance, we're going to have people in Mongolia, then going all the way out to Hawaii. So whiteboarding really only works if you can be synchronous. I think some of that can still happen, but specifically in infrastructure, I want to move us to a little bit more of the design work type thing, where we clearly outline one of the problems we're trying to solve. Then we clearly outline some of the ideas in terms of design of how we solve that problem. And then we allow a little bit of time for the team to be able to asynchronously comment on that. Now, a lot of that is happening today when you open an issue. But they sometimes turn into these really long conversations, and the output of those conversations isn't always clear. So sometimes we update the description, but sometimes the decisions that are being made stay in the comments. So I want to move towards something that more clearly extracts the problem statement, the description of the issue, and then the decisions that are being made into the comments, and that turns into a small document. Part of that process can include whiteboarding for folks that can actually be synchronous at different times. But I expect Amar and Devin to not really overlap a whole lot because the time difference is just so huge. So we can certainly adopt some whiteboarding technologies, but I think that's going to be at a level for smaller groups when, say, Jarv and myself and Amar, who are closer time-wise, where we can, talk about these things. But these decisions need to end up in sort of a, hey, here is the document that outlines the decisions we've made. And then give time to the rest of the team to essentially comment on those until we actually clamp down on the final path that we're going to choose. So no specific answer, but I think whiteboarding on an asynchronous mode is much harder and not as useful. Great. Well, if there are no more questions, I think we can wrap up the FGU. I am looking forward to meeting and seeing everyone next week at the summit. If you have more questions, comments, feedback, just come and chase us down. We'll be around. I'll be sure to chase some people down that I really want to have some conversations with. I think it's going to be a great opportunity, and I am totally looking forward to it. So have a great week.